Sister Jacqueline, while I was up there, I had the strangest feeling. If I really wanted to, I could have flown.
From a star who despised every moment of filming to a replacement actress, fired mid-pilot and bizarre aerodynamic explanations that almost make sense, The Flying Nun was far stranger behind the scenes than anything that aired on screen. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Flying Nun. Fact 1. Sally Field actually hated the role.
So the woman I worked with, a great actress on The Flying Nun, grabbed me and took me to the back of the soundstage and put a piece of paper in my hand because I was really depressed. And I gained 20 pounds in 2 hours.
Sally Field may have looked like the perfect picture of cheerful innocence as Sister Bertreel. But behind the scenes, she despised every single moment of filming The Flying Nun. In numerous interviews over the years, Field has been brutally honest about her experience on the show, calling it, quote, zero, and admitting that she, quote, won the young actress, who was only 19 years old when the series began in 1967, felt trapped in a role that she believed was beneath her abilities and embarrassing to perform. Field has explained that she found the premise ridiculous and the scripts poorly written, which made it nearly impossible for her to take the work seriously. Her frustration was so intense that she developed a rather unconventional method of dealing with the material. She simply refused to memorize her lines in advance. Instead, Field would arrive on set and learn her dialogue just minutes before filming each scene by reading the script supervisor's notes. This last-minute approach allowed her to get through the day without having to spend too much time thinking about material she found so objectionable. The irony, of course, is that Field's performance appeared effortless and charming on screen, with audiences completely unaware of the misery she was experiencing. She later reflected that taking the role was a mistake, driven by pressure from her stepfather and agent, and that the show's success actually damaged her career for years afterward because she couldn't be taken seriously as an actress. It wasn't until she fought hard for dramatic roles in the 1970s that she finally escaped the shadow of The Flying Nun. Fact 2. Another actress was fired.
Airborne?
Yes, I had some trouble with the wind.
The wind? Well, Sister Bertreel only weighs 90 pounds, and sometimes the wind lifts her. Lifts her where? Up.
After filming started before Sally Field ever donned the iconic cornet, another actress had already been cast, costumed, and was actively filming the pilot episode of The Flying Nun. Ronne Troupe, a young actress who had appeared in various television shows throughout the 1960s, was originally chosen to play Sister Bertreel and had actually begun production on the pilot. Cameras were rolling, scenes were being shot, and Troupe was well into the filming process when everything suddenly changed. Sally Field, who had initially turned down the role because she thought the concept was absurd, unexpectedly changed her mind and decided she wanted the part after all. The reasons for Field's change of heart have been debated over the years. Some sources suggest pressure from her stepfather and agent, while others indicate that Screen Gems, the production company behind the show, was so determined to have Field that they made her an offer she couldn't refuse. Whatever the reason, as soon as Field committed to the role, Screen Gems made the shocking decision to fire Ronne Troupe immediately and replace her with Field mid-production. This meant that all of the footage that had already been shot with Troupe was scrapped and the pilot had to be partially refilmed with the new star. For Troupe, it must have been a devastating experience to lose such a high-profile role after already beginning work, especially since The Flying Nun went on to become a hit series that ran for 3 seasons and made Sally Field a household name. Troupe continued acting in television throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, but she never achieved the level of fame that might have been hers had she remained in the role. Fact 3. The show used scientific aerodynamics explanation.
It's okay, I figured it all out. It all has to do with my cornet.
The cornet?
Yes. You see, when lift plus thrust is greater than load plus drag, Well, anything will fly.
Unlike most fantasy sitcoms of the 1960s that simply asked audiences to accept magic without explanation, The Flying Nun actually attempted to justify its outlandish premise with real scientific principles. The show's creators developed an elaborate aerodynamic rationale for why Sister Bertrille could fly, and this explanation was presented to viewers as if it were perfectly logical. According to the show's internal logic, Sister Bertrille's ability to take flight was based on a genuine principle of aeronautics. Quote 3. This is, in fact, a real formula used in aviation and engineering to determine whether an object can achieve flight. The show explained that Sister Bertrille's unusually large cornet, the traditional winged headdress worn by her order of nuns, acted as an airfoil, similar to an airplane wing. When combined with her extremely light body weight of only 90 pounds, the cornet could theoretically generate enough lift in strong winds to overcome her weight and drag, allowing her to become airborne. The producers even consulted with aeronautical experts to make sure their explanation sounded plausible, though of course no real physicist would ever claim that a cornet could actually provide sufficient lift for human flight. This pseudo-scientific approach set The Flying Nun apart from shows like Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie, which relied purely on magic and supernatural powers. The show would often feature scenes where Sister Bertrille or other characters would explain the aerodynamics involved, treating her flying ability as an unusual but scientifically explainable phenomenon rather than a miracle or fantasy. It was a creative way to ground an absurd concept in something resembling reality, even if the science didn't actually hold up under scrutiny. Fact 4. Sally Field was only 90 pounds.
You see, one of the many things we didn't know about Sister Bertrille was that she only weighed 90 pounds.
The entire premise of The Flying Nun hinged on one very specific physical requirement. Sister Bertrille had to be extraordinarily light in order for the show's aerodynamic explanation to make even the slightest bit of sense. According to the show's internal logic, the combination of the large cornet acting as a wing and the nun's minimal body weight created the conditions necessary for flight. When Sally Field was cast in the role, she weighed exactly 90 pounds, which was considered perfect for the character and became a crucial plot point throughout the series. Field was naturally petite and slender, standing only 5 feet 2 inches tall, and her tiny frame was essential to maintaining the illusion that this bizarre form of flight could actually work. The show frequently referenced Sister Bertrille's weight as the key factor in her ability to fly, and there were even episodes where the plot revolved around her gaining weight and temporarily losing her flying powers. Field's actual weight of 90 pounds wasn't just a convenient coincidence. It was so integral to the show's concept that maintaining it became an unspoken expectation of her employment. This created an uncomfortable situation for the young actress, who was essentially being told that her body size was a professional requirement. While the show treated Sister Bertrille's light weight as a charming quirk, it placed real pressure on Field to remain extremely thin throughout the series' 3-year run. Looking back decades later, Field has acknowledged how problematic this aspect of the show was, particularly given how young she was at the time. The emphasis on her weight as both a plot device and a physical necessity for the role reflected the entertainment industry's often troubling attitudes toward women's bodies, especially in the 1960s, when such expectations were rarely questioned. Fact 5. Directors treated Field like a prop.
That old heap.
Yes, it's very vulnerable.
That's venerable.
Oh, it broke down, so it's also vulnerable. Whatever that means.
Sally Field's experience on The Flying Nun wasn't just emotionally difficult because she hated the material. It was also physically degrading in ways that left lasting impressions on the young actress. Field has spoken openly about how directors on the show treated her less like a human performer and more like an inanimate object or puppet that could be moved and positioned without consideration for her dignity. When filming the flying sequences, Field would be suspended from wires and crane equipment, which required precise positioning for the camera angles to work properly. Rather than giving her verbal direction or allowing her to adjust her own position, directors would routinely walk up to her while she was hanging in the air and physically grab her shoulders, arms, or body to manually move her into the exact position they wanted. Field described feeling humiliated by this treatment, explaining that the directors would literally handle her as if she were a mannequin rather than speaking to her like a professional actress. This lack of respect was particularly difficult for Field, who was only 19 when the series began and was still learning to assert herself in the industry. She felt powerless to object to this treatment because she was young, relatively inexperienced, and worried about being seen as difficult or unprofessional. The physical nature of the flying stunts meant that Field was often in vulnerable positions, suspended in the air, unable to move freely, and dependent on the crew for her safety, which made the director's hands-on approach feel even more invasive. Looking back on the experience years later, Field recognized this treatment as part of a broader pattern of how women, especially young women, were often disrespected on television and film sets during that era. She has described The Flying Nun as a learning experience in what she would and wouldn't tolerate in her career moving forward. Fact 6. Field hung from cranes 75 feet high.
I said, come on! Oh, good grief, now what am I going to do?
The flying sequences that made The Flying Nun instantly recognizable weren't achieved through special effects or blue screen technology. They required Sally Field to perform genuinely dangerous stunts that placed her high in the air with minimal safety precautions by today's standards. Field was regularly suspended from massive construction cranes that were mounted on trucks, and these mobile crane rigs would roll down roads while she hung from wires, sometimes at heights of 75 feet or more above the ground. The production crew used these truck-mounted cranes because they allowed for continuous motion shots that made Sister Bertrelli's flight look more realistic and dynamic than simple static wire work could achieve. As the trucks drove along, Field would be suspended in her nun's habit, positioned to look as if she were gliding through the air under her own power. The movement of the trucks created natural-looking flight paths, but it also introduced real dangers. When the trucks hit bumps in the road or made turns, Field would swing and sway unpredictably, creating what the crew called air turbulence that actually made the flying look more authentic on camera. However, this also meant that Field experienced sudden jerks and drops that must have been terrifying. She performed these stunts repeatedly throughout the series' 3-year run, and while she had wires and harnesses for support, the safety standards of the late 1960s were far less stringent than modern Hollywood requirements. Field has described the physical toll of these stunts and the fear she felt while hanging so high in the air, particularly during takes where things didn't go as planned. The fact that she performed these dangerous sequences while simultaneously feeling miserable about the role itself only added to her overall negative experience on the show. Fact 7. Gidget footage was recycled as flashback.
You see before you me, Gidget. For 15 and a half years, my life was a complete and total ick. But then, on the 23rd of June, 2 things happened. I fell in love.
Television production in the 1960s was all about efficiency and cost-cutting, and The Flying Nun provided a perfect opportunity for one of the most creative examples of recycling footage in TV history. In an episode that required showing Sister Bertrelli's life before she entered the convent, the production needed footage of her as a regular teenager, engaging in normal activities like going to the beach and spending time with friends. Rather than filming entirely new scenes with Sally Field dressed in civilian clothes and creating a whole new setting, the producers realized they had a much simpler solution readily available. Just 1 year before The Flying Nun premiered, Sally Field had starred in another sitcom called Gidget, where she played a surf-loving California teenager. The character of Gidget was essentially what Sister Bertrelli's pre-convent life would have looked like. a young, energetic girl living a carefree beach lifestyle. So the producers of The Flying Nun simply pulled footage directly from the Gidget series and edited it into the episode as Sister Bertrelli's home movies or flashback sequences. This creative decision saved the production significant time and money, while also providing a fun inside joke for viewers who recognized Sally Field from her previous show. It created an unintentional continuity between Field's two sitcom characters, suggesting that Gidget had somehow grown up to become a flying nun. For Field herself, seeing footage from Gidget appear in The Flying Nun must have been a strange reminder of how quickly her career had shifted from one lightweight sitcom to another, both of which she would later express frustration about. The reused footage has since become a curious piece of television trivia, representing the kind of practical production decisions that were common in an era before home video, and internet streaming made such shortcuts more noticeable to audiences. Fact 8. Field's pregnancy had to be hidden.
What's for lunch? Oh, sorry I asked.
By the time The Flying Nun reached its third and final season in 1969, the production faced an unexpected challenge that created what crew members described as a, quote, 6. Sally Field was pregnant. Field had married her high school sweetheart, Steve Craig, and became pregnant during the show's run, which presented enormous problems for a series about a celibate Catholic nun. The visual contradiction of a visibly pregnant woman playing a member of a religious order sworn to chastity would have been jarring and inappropriate for audiences in the late 1960s, so the production had to go to extraordinary lengths to hide Field's changing body. As her pregnancy progressed, the costume department had to continually adjust Sister Bertrell's habit to be looser and more concealing, while the set designers strategically placed props, furniture, and other obstacles in front of Field to block the camera's view of her midsection. Directors framed shots carefully to show Field only from the shoulders up or from behind, and when wider shots were necessary, they would position her behind desks, counters, or other nuns in group scenes. The flying sequences became particularly challenging because they required full body shots and had previously shown off Field's tiny 90-pound frame as part of the show's premise. During this period, stunt doubles took over most of the flying scenes, with Field only appearing in close-ups or carefully composed shots that hid her pregnancy. Some episodes from the third season feature noticeably less flying than earlier seasons, partly because of these limitations. The entire situation highlighted the absurdity of continuing a show built around a premise that depended on the star's physical appearance when that appearance could no longer be maintained. Field gave birth to her son Peter in November of 1969, just months before the show was finally canceled. Fact 9. First and only American series set in Puerto Rico.
Oh, I could take him with me easily enough.
Fine.
But he would probably die.
Oh, Reverend Mother, we can't let him die.
Really, sister, this is utterly ridiculous. What on earth could he be pining for here at Santanco?
When The Flying Nun premiered in 1967, it made television history by becoming the first American network series to be set in Puerto Rico. This was a genuinely groundbreaking choice at a time when the vast majority of television shows were set in generic American cities or suburbs, and when Latino characters and Hispanic culture were almost entirely absent from mainstream programming. The show took place at the Convent Santanco in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and while the vast majority of filming actually took place on Hollywood soundstages and backlots, the Puerto Rican setting was an integral part of the show's identity. The series featured Puerto Rican characters in supporting roles, included Spanish-language phrases and dialogue, and incorporated cultural elements of Caribbean island life into various storylines. For 1960s television, this level of cultural specificity was unusual and represented at least an attempt to acknowledge that America extended beyond the mainland. The choice of Puerto Rico as a setting was partly inspired by the original book that the series was based on, Quote 7 by Terry Rios, which was also set in a Puerto Rican convent. What makes this fact even more remarkable is that more than 50 years later, The Flying Nun remains the first and only American television series to be primarily set in Puerto Rico. While other shows have occasionally featured episodes set on the island or included Puerto Rican characters, no other series has made Puerto Rico its main setting throughout an entire run. This makes The Flying Nun an odd but significant piece of representation in television history, even as the show itself has been criticized for other aspects of its portrayal of Latino culture and characters. Fact 10. Pilot was shot in actual Puerto Rico.
This is Sister Sisto. Sister Sisto is from Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Oh, mucho gusto en conocerla, hermana Sisto.
You're a little wet behind the ears.
While most episodes of The Flying Nun were filmed entirely in California, the production made a significant investment in authenticity by filming the original pilot episode on location in San Juan, Puerto Rico. This was a substantial commitment for a television show in 1967, when traveling an entire cast and crew to the Caribbean for filming was expensive and logistically complicated. The pilot was produced as an extended hour-long episode rather than the standard 30-minute format that the series would use for the rest of its run, and the extra length allowed for more elaborate storytelling that took advantage of the real Puerto Rican locations. The production crew filmed at various sites throughout San Juan, capturing the colonial architecture, tropical landscapes, and vibrant street scenes that would help establish the show's unique setting. The footage shot during this location filming was carefully edited and used strategically throughout the entire 3-year run of the series. Most notably, the opening credit sequence that played at the beginning of every episode featured aerial shots and scenic views of Puerto Rico that were captured during the pilot production. The closing credits also incorporated this location footage, giving every episode bookends that reminded viewers of the show's exotic Caribbean setting, even though the episodes themselves were filmed on Hollywood sets. Additionally, establishing shots throughout the series would frequently use footage from the Puerto Rico shoot to create transitions or to set scenes before cutting to interior soundstage filming. This meant that the investment in the on-location pilot continued to pay dividends for the production throughout the show's entire run, providing visual authenticity that would have been impossible to recreate in California while avoiding the ongoing expense of filming multiple episodes in Puerto Rico. Fact 11. One episode had no laugh track.
When I was little, I often wished I were a bird. They seemed so free and graceful.
And you weren't?
I was the klutz of the neighborhood. Fell out of the treehouse 9 times in the 4th grade alone.
In the middle of The Flying Nun's run, the show produced one of the most unusual episodes in sitcom history, a dramatic half-hour that completely abandoned the series' typical lighthearted tone and eliminated one of television comedy's most essential elements, the laugh track. The episode, titled The Dig In, featured only 2 characters, Sister Bertrille and a man played by actor and director Henry Jaglom, who become trapped together in a collapsed cave following an earthquake. The entire episode took place in this single claustrophobic setting, with just Sally Field and Jaglom performing an extended 2-person drama about survival, fear, and human connection. What made this episode truly extraordinary for 1960s television was not just the serious subject matter, but the production's decision to remove the laugh track entirely and even show actual blood on screen when one character was injured. Sitcoms of this era almost never deviated from their established formulas, and the laugh track was considered so essential that even dramatic moments in comedy shows typically featured it. For The Flying Nun to air an episode without any canned laughter, without any comedic elements, and with realistic injury effects was virtually unprecedented. The episode was essentially a serious drama that happened to star characters from a sitcom, and it demonstrated that Sally Field had genuine dramatic abilities beyond the silly premise of the show. Jaglom, who was already establishing himself as an avant-garde filmmaker, brought an experimental sensibility to the episode that was completely at odds with the rest of the series. The episode stands as a bizarre anomaly in the Flying Nun's catalog, and it's a fascinating example of what could happen when network television occasionally took creative risks during an era that's now remembered for rigid formulaic programming. Fact 12. Emmy nominee lost to posthumous winner.
Helped pass the time while I was in jail.
Prison?
Yeah, I was arrested at a free speech protest rally.
Marge Redmond, who played Sister Jacqueline on The Flying Nun, delivered such a memorable and beloved performance that she earned a nomination for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series at the Emmy Awards. Redmond's character was Sister Bertrille's close friend and confidant at the convent, and her warm, humorous portrayal made her a fan favorite throughout the show's run. Being nominated for an Emmy was a significant achievement and recognition of Redmond's talent, especially on a show that was often dismissed by critics as lightweight entertainment. However, when the Emmy ceremony took place, Redmond faced competition in her category from Marion Lorne, who had been nominated for her role as the befuddled Aunt Clara on the hit supernatural sitcom Bewitched. Marion Lorne was a veteran character actress who had appeared in films and television for decades, and her portrayal of the lovably forgetful witch had made her one of the most cherished performers on television. Tragically, Marion Lorne had died earlier that year before the Emmy ceremony took place, making her nomination posthumous. When the winner was announced, Marion Lorne's name was called, and she became one of the rare performers to win an Emmy Award after death. The award was accepted on her behalf by someone from the Bewitched production, creating an emotional moment during the ceremony. For Marge Redmond, losing the Emmy must have been bittersweet. While anyone would have been honored to lose to such a beloved performer, and while there was no question that Marion Lorne deserved recognition for her work, it still meant that Redmond's excellent performance went without the ultimate acknowledgement that the Emmy would have provided. Fact 13. Mad Magazine parodied it as Mao Quote 9.
There's a nun on the back of your boat.
There's a what?
Hi.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm Sister Bertrille. I just arrived from the United States.
You swam all the way?
During the height of the Flying Nun's popularity, the show caught the attention of Mad Magazine, the legendary satirical publication that had been mercilessly mocking popular culture since the 1950s. MAD magazine had built its reputation on creating elaborate parodies of movies, television shows, and celebrities, transforming their names and premises into absurdist humor that exposed the ridiculous aspects of mainstream entertainment. The Flying Nun, with its already outlandish premise of a flying nun defying physics, was essentially perfect material for MAD's treatment. The magazine produced a multi-page parody that reimagined the show as, quote, 10 a title that transformed both the character's name and the show's title into obvious jokes. The parody featured Mad's typical style of exaggerated artwork depicting the Flying Nun character in increasingly ridiculous situations, while the accompanying text mocked everything from the show's pseudo-scientific explanations for flight to the sugary sweet tone of the series. Being parodied in Mad Magazine was actually a significant cultural marker in the 1960s. It meant that a show or movie had become popular and recognizable enough to be worth satirizing, and many performers and creators considered a Mad Magazine parody to be a strange form of validation. For Sally Field, who already felt embarrassed about starring in The Flying Nun, seeing her character transformed into, quote, 11 in the pages of Mad could only have reinforced her feelings that the show was absurd. However, for the network and producers, the parody represented free publicity and proof that their show had penetrated the cultural consciousness deeply enough to become part of America's comedy landscape. Fact 14. Convent set was destroyed by fire.
I want to make it snow for Sister Olaf.
Snow in San Juan? Sister, it never snows in San Juan.
Have you ever had a flying nun here before?
While viewers watching The Flying Nun might have believed they were seeing an actual convent in Puerto Rico, the reality was that the convent Santanco was entirely constructed on a backlot at Warner Brothers Ranch in Burbank, California. This elaborate set included the convent's distinctive Spanish colonial architecture, complete with whitewashed walls, terracotta tile roofing, arched doorways, and a courtyard that appeared in countless episodes throughout the series. The set was built to be photographed from multiple angles and featured both exterior facades and some practical interior spaces that could be used for filming outdoor scenes without moving to a soundstage. This convent set became one of the recognizable locations on the Warner Brothers backlot and was used extensively not just for The Flying Nun, but potentially for other productions that needed similar Spanish colonial architecture. However, in August of 1970, approximately 1 year after The Flying Nun had ended its run, disaster struck the Warner Brothers Ranch. A massive fire broke out on the backlot, and the flames spread rapidly through the various standing sets and structures that had been built over decades of film and television production. The fire was devastating, destroying numerous iconic sets that had appeared in countless productions. And among the casualties was almost the entire Convent Santanco exterior set from The Flying Nun. By the time firefighters brought the blaze under control, the convent that had served as Sister Bertrille's home for 3 seasons was reduced to charred ruins. The destruction of the set meant that any potential revival or reunion special for The Flying Nun would have required building everything from scratch, though given Sally Field's well-documented hatred of the show, such a revival was unlikely, regardless of whether the set still existed. Fact 15. Ranked number 42 on TV Guide's worst shows ever.
Irving! Irving, will you please stop following me around? People are beginning to talk. Look, Irving, if you want religion, why don't you try the synagogue?
Despite achieving respectable ratings during its 3-season run from 1967 to 1970, and despite launching Sally Field into stardom, The Flying Nun has not been treated kindly by television historians and critics looking back at the show decades later. In 2002, TV Guide, the most influential television publication in America, compiled a list of the 50 worst television shows of all time. This list was intended to catalog the most poorly conceived, badly executed, or culturally embarrassing programs in the history of the medium, and it covered decades of television from the earliest days of broadcasting through the contemporary era. When the list was published, The Flying Nun appeared at number 42, placing it firmly in the bottom tier of television programming, according to TV Guide's assessment. The inclusion of The Flying Nun on this list represented a critical reassessment of a show that had once been popular enough to run for 3 years and 82 episodes on a major network. The show was specifically criticized for its absurd premise, saccharine tone, and waste of Sally Field's talents during her formative years as an actress. For Field herself, who had spent decades trying to live down her association with the show and establish herself as a serious dramatic performer, TV Guide's ranking probably felt like vindication of her own negative feelings about the series. The ranking also reflected changing cultural attitudes. What might have seemed like harmless, wholesome family entertainment in the 1960s had come to be seen as an embarrassing example of television's tendency toward lowest common denominator programming. The show's position at number 42 meant that TV Guide considered it worse than the vast majority of television shows, but not quite terrible enough to crack the bottom 10, leaving The Flying Nun with the dubious distinction of being memorably bad, but not legendarily awful.